All right. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Rising from the Ashes. I have Linda here today. Is your last name pronounced Fabry?
Fabry.
Fabry. Linda
Yeah.
Fabry. And we have all different kinds of stories for each of these episodes. So I'll let Linda tell you a little bit about her story. But what I really liked is that we haven't had anybody that had like a sudden onset of illness that really shifted their business. And I know that this is something that is one of the big life altering events that people can go through that can really shift their path. And so, Linda, I'd love for you to just tell us maybe like a top level overview of your journey, and then we'll kind of dive into some of the specifics and the details.
Okay. I guess the like where it started or where it changed my trajectory. So I'll tell you what the trajectory was.
Yeah.
I went back to school in my 30s as a single mom. My son was like 4 years old, and
Wow.
I found this amazing grant program that allowed me to get my degree in art therapy. So I was on track to become an art therapist, which was
Oh,
like a
wow.
lifelong dream kind of thing. And so I was in my third year of school, and I kind of had this perfect storm of I was preparing to go into like my field work placement to work in a hospital, and so they couldn't find any of my vaccine records and stuff. And so I didn't know any better at the time, and they're like, well, we could just give them all to you again. And I'm like, sure, yeah, whatever, just shoot me full of stuff. I'll just.
Wow.
And so that happened at the same time. I was obviously under a lot of stress, and I also went somewhere, and I was in Oregon. I took a little vacation over the summer, and there was like this really mangy deer that walked up to us, and knowing nothing about Lyme disease, I was hugging a really mangy deer and probably got bit by a tick. So
Mhm.
the combination of like all having like a bunch of vaccines all at once, probably getting Lyme disease at the same time, but not knowing it, being on Chantix because I was trying to quit smoking. And so like all of this in my system
Yeah.
crashed me. Like
Wow.
my whole system crashed, but I didn't know it. I was just like, oh, I like the day after I was like, oh God, I feel like I have the flu. And never like have a really tough constitution up until then and never got sick. Single mom, I
Wow.
don't get sick. And so I kept going to the doctor. I'm like, no, I'm not okay. No, I'm not okay forever. And I went from, you know, putting in 12-hour days, just doing everything for my whole household, taking care of my son, putting him to bed, and then doing like, I was a full-time student and working. I
Wow.
was doing medical
Wow.
transcription at the time from home, and I was going to school full time, and I was staying up late, and I was doing it all, and I was juggling it all, and I was doing really well. And then I just dropped all the balls. And
Wow.
I went from doing all that. I was helping other people write papers. I could process information so quickly. That was the hardest thing, was I went from being able to process things to not even being able to read at like a basic level. I couldn't hold words in my
Wow.
brain. Had such brain fog. Everything in my body hurt from head to toe. I remember pushing my son through Target, and I had to sit down on the floor because I was so
Mm.
exhausted. I couldn't even walk from the entrance to, the dog food, and
Yeah.
I just didn't know what was going on. And nobody else knew what was going on either. So I got no answers for a long time. I did manage to graduate. I pushed through, but I was sick and I was not the same person. And I graduated with high honors. I received an assistantship to go and get my master's, but I couldn't do it. I
Yeah.
had this amazing offer to do an assistantship to get a master's in art therapy at Prescott College. I couldn't get there. I ended
Mm.
up like just, so that it shifted direction for me. And I
How
was
long
like,
did that last for? Like that period?
I, well, a decade of
Wow.
that illness. But
Wow.
yeah, but it had different phases. But I am only about a year of not being drop down, drag out fibromyalgia, Lyme disease, Hashimoto's hyperthyroidism, hyper, and like just a host of other things. I applied for disability about 4 times over the past decade and was denied because I made too much money and
Mm.
like all these different things. I couldn't stop working, but I wasn't able to work enough. But so it shifted me where I was like, I can't pursue this. I tried to get my master's online a couple times, but because of the brain fog and stuff, I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So it put me on a new course. It just I couldn't become, what I thought I was supposed to become. So
Yeah.
I had to shift that. So I
When you look at this now and you're like
Mhm.
looking back and you see the path that you're on and where it led you, like what's your viewpoint of it now?
Well, I think that the biggest blessing of being sick is that you learn your tolerance lessons.
Mm.
And and what I mean is like your tolerance for bullshit. Like I couldn't tolerate stress. So it really limited my palate. And I think, and as an artist, like I thrive when I have a limited palate. Or like if you've ever had just a few ingredients in your kitchen to make dinner with, you make the most fantastic dishes. Like looking back, obviously at the time I wasn't enjoying it very much, but it really caused me to choose myself. I think if I were to say one lesson of all of those things was, I had to choose myself, and I had to learn to do that because I was just pushing through and giving and being what other people wanted me to be, even though I was kind of a rebel my whole life. Like I still was trying to navigate within these confines of what people expected or what success was supposed to look like or how you're supposed to live your life or whatever.
Yeah.
And the sicker I got, the more narrow that got. And the more I was like, I have to figure out something that works for me, that's not going
Yep.
to stress me out, that's not going to take too much from me, and I had to leverage the energy I did have because some
Yeah.
days I couldn't move from bed to toilet. Like I just couldn't even, do that much.
Totally. I mean, I think what you're
So,
saying here is such an important conversation because when you do go through the various kind of life altering events, dark nights of the soul moments, whether it's something that you chose, like, or life chose for you, I think that it does shift you and it kind of makes you maybe need to make some adjustments in your business or in your life
mhm.
because, like you said, you couldn't stop working at that time, right? You still needed to take
I
care of your son.
had to
And it's
find a way. Yeah.
and so, what were some like learnings or things that you look back at that you felt like you did really well to kind of adjust for what would work better for you and what you needed at that time?
Um, I think the flexibility that or the imagination. Like I think one of my strengths is that I'm open to possibility. I'm not I've always been kind of like able to imagine what other ways, okay, so I can't get a job where I would have to commit to showing up because I didn't know if I'd be able to show up from day to day. So what
Yeah.
can I do? What can I do from day to day? And I'm like, what skills? And I was able to take inventory. And I I'm an old school entrepreneur. I like cut my teeth on Zig Ziglar and like that stuff. So toxic positivity like that. So I kind of had that skill already where it was like, hey, I
Mm,
may not be able to control what's happening to me or like what's going on or what life is showing me. Um, eh, to the degree that I want to. I mean, I do think there is some control, but what I really knew I had control over was how I defined it and the meaning I gave it. And
yeah.
that really relates to the work that I do now, whereas I'm creating images with people and helping them give meaning to what the images are. And you can
Yeah,
pick,
talk more
you know,
about your work. Tell me more about that.
so I do the process I use is called paint. I call it paint gazing. Somebody called it that once, and I was like, "Can I have that? I love that." It's like cloud gazing. And it's kind of like an ink blot. It's just something a lot of people do. We use the power of pareidolia, which is just our brain connecting the dots when we look at things, abstract background, a coffee stain or something on the wood grain or whatever. We go, oh, that looks like Jesus or whatever. And so I use that in my art, and it started out where I would make a landscape, and I just love to paint trees. So I'd fold canvas in half I'd splatter paint. I was doing pour painting like 20, 30 years ago and just pouring paint on and squishing it. Kind of came out of my love for tie-dye making and stuff. And then I'd open it up and I'd be like, "Oh, that looks like trees and a waterfall," and I would just make it look as best I could what I thought I saw. And then that's evolved over the past 30 years to where I can, now have developed some skills where I can make it look like a face or I can make it look like a car or whatever I see in it.
Yeah.
But then with my art therapy background, I've learned some different ideas, or like also from learning how to read tarot and oracle cards and spreads and things, and pulling from different things I've learned from different books I've read about symbolism and cultural anthropology and art and all this stuff. Now I've got kind of this database I can pull from, like, oh, when this image often represents this and this, and so I have this vocabulary where I can look at a scene, and then it's a little similar to dream analysis too. So I can go, oh, well, okay, if this scene that we just created represents my question about what's next in life, or my client's question about their future soulmate or their relationship or their career, whatever, what is it saying? And because when I created, I'm tapped into my source or whatever, their source is there too. So I feel like it's channeling, and they're borrowing my hands to create this image. And so
Hmm.
that's kind of a long way to describe what it is. But yeah, so I use it in a couple different forms through portraits and one-on-one sessions, and I make oracle cards and things. But
Oh,
that's when
wow.
I do a daily on my calendar, which you could see back there.
You paint every day now.
Almost every day. I'm just getting over COVID, so
Oh,
I
man.
just took 3 days off, and
Oh,
but you
yeah.
know what, this is what I've learned, and it's funny because I never get sick. I really, like, these days, I very, very rarely get sick, and I thought, how funny that I'm gonna be talking about taking care of myself if I
Yourself
get
on
a
this
cold,
interview? Oh my
and I'm
goodness.
like, "Oh, yeah, it definitely fit very well," because it was, again, I'm in a position now where it's like, I need to take care of me. And I've learned, 10 years ago, I would have pushed through and I would have got sicker and sicker and sicker until I was forced to stop what I was doing.
Right.
And that's the big lesson that I learned, was like, I don't have the tolerance for pushing through anymore. I don't have the tolerance for giving myself to others when I'm not fully equipped to, you
Yes.
know? So,
Yes. Did you
yeah.
paint every day or almost every day before the illness happened?
I was in school for art therapy, so I was just learning a visual journaling practice. So we had, as part of my coursework, that I had to journal several times a week. So the process was, you set an intention, you do an image, you reflect on the image in writing, and you keep that in a journal. And so that practice started before I got sick. And then like a lot of us do, when the shit hits the fan, we forget all the things that are good for us and we stop doing them. So it took me a long time to get back to it. Um, and so that was one of the first steps I took to heal myself, was to get back to
Mm.
creating every day.
Okay, tell me
Um,
about, like,
yeah.
well, I guess I'm curious as well, like, about, like, you as a child, because I do feel like sometimes our inner child, like, really
Oh,
gets
yeah.
left behind, and I think we have such an interesting relationship with creativity as adults, and, like, to me, it's like
Yeah.
content is creativity, but then we were talking about this before we started recording, that sometimes we can kind of get too much into this business mode where it stops being fun, and
Mhm.
I think as kids, like, we just created to create. Like, it didn't have to be
Oh,
for
yeah.
any specific purpose or just for our own enjoyment, right? For the experience
Yeah.
of creating. And so I'm curious, like, how Linda as a child was. Like, were you creating and
Oh, yeah. I was I was a weird little kid, and I just love my inner child so much. But, um, I was super imaginative. I'm the youngest of 4 by, like, 6 years, so I had, like,
wow.
5 parents. So I had, like, 3 older siblings who were this little cluster they were, like, all adults to me in a way. Um, so I was kind of like an only child also, so I would retreat a lot into my room, and I would do things like, I wasn't just like painting and drawing, but I love to like create space. I still do. I still love decorating and stuff. But I remember, like, I had one of those radiators, like the floor in the radiator where the heat comes out, and I would bundle up with a thing, and I would like get a little pack on a like the hobos in the cartoons with the stick and the thing. And I would like pretend I was jumping on a train and that my little radiator was like the fire. And I would like hang out there and I would do these like act out these imaginative scenes all by myself in this little world. And I would like I wrote a lot. I wrote little stories. I was always drawing. And then I would make still lifes before I even knew that that was a thing, or maybe I had learned about it or something in school, and I would make still lifes of my favorite things and sit and draw them.
Oh,
But it was
wow.
very intentional where I was like, I'm honoring my stuffed bunny, or you know what I mean, by making this. I was very spiritual as a little
Oh,
kid,
wow. How
and yeah,
was this, like, nurtured,
but
encouraged from the adults around you, or were you
okay,
just coming
so
up
it's
with this on your
weird.
own?
I don't okay, so I went to a Catholic grade school from
Okay.
kindergarten, but I
Okay.
actually got kicked out of Catholic grade school at, like, 6th grade, but or they I don't know, the story is unclear, but I do remember and someone reminded me of this when everybody started connecting on Facebook and stuff, like, back in the early turn of the century, and someone was like, "I remember you telling us that they were brainwashing us because I used to tell people that they were I refused to stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance and to say the daily prayer because
You're
I
in
was like,
trouble,
"I don't know
Linda.
what this means, and I don't know why we're doing this, but I think they're brainwashing us." So, I was
And
weird,
then you
but I
got
like
kicked out.
but yeah, like, but that's not for many years, but that was just
Okay.
behavior stuff. I just have always been a questioner
Yeah.
and curious, and things when they don't make sense, they don't, and so going back to, like, when I got sick, I think brought me back to that child who knew that I don't have tolerance for bullshit, like, or
Mm,
BS. Like, I don't have
yeah.
tolerance for stuff that's just not truth with a capital T. Don't waste my time with this stuff that even you don't understand. Like, that's how I felt about adults. Like, you don't even know why you're teaching me this math. Like, so don't tell me I need to learn it if you don't you're like, you're only teach like, I could feel what
You could feel
the
that.
truth was,
Yeah.
and I was like, "This doesn't make sense. Why are you having me do worksheets at home? Like, you don't care if I do this or not." Like, it didn't make sense to me. So I always had a problem. I was always in trouble. I was grounded most of my childhood when grounding mattered, and, barely graduated from high school. By that time, I was more interested in hanging out with my friends and smoking weed, like, and music. I didn't care about anything like
Yeah.
that, which is makes it extra funny that when I did go to college, I got nominated for Student of the Year. I won multiple
Wow.
awards for academics and community involvement. Like, it's
Things
kind of
change.
hilarious. Yeah,
Yes.
it was a huge change. But so I've always carried my inner child with me. Like, I've been very lucky that though it wasn't nurtured in the sense that people were like, "Yes, you should totally be an artist when you grow up." No, 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 no. I
Mhm.
was definitely told that art is a nicety and not a necessity, and that you have to have, like, a real job.
Okay.
But I was always an entrepreneur too, so I bought and sold motorcycles.
Oh,
I
wow.
had a lawn aeration company.
Oh,
I did the whole,
you've
like,
really run the
perfume out of a
gamut.
bag thing. Like, I was driving all over right after high school, I was driving all over the country selling people knockoff perfume. Like, it was yeah, when I say I'm an old school entrepreneur, I mean, like, I was doing fortunes and foreclosures when I was 19. I
Oh my
was doing this
goodness.
stuff. It was
The
ridiculous.
creativity of it. What
Mhm.
what was your life like and, like, what was going on in life before the illness stuff came
Oh,
about?
I had just moved to this town, finally living out, so I had been living with my parents with my son, because I left his dad, because I wanted a different life for him, and
Mhm.
so and I was selling my artwork on eBay, and, I was making okay. It was doing alright. I was as successful as you can imagine, like, 2 years into a art sales business online
Yeah.
in 2001. Um I made that choice because I wanted to be home with him because my son was born with clubfoot and he had casting on his legs and he needed some special
Mm.
care, and I didn't want to trust that into other people. I wanted to be home with him for that.
Yeah.
And then I more and more, like, I just really liked being I liked him. I wanted to be around him, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm like, whatever I can do to work from home. So I had a decent eBay business selling my artwork that way. I sold thousands of paintings on eBay.
Wow.
It was great. And then in galleries and things like that. But
And this was your artwork.
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
So when I was, putting paint on and folding it canvas in half, and those were called my reflection series. So I've sold at least 1,000 of those through eBay,
Wow.
since from between like 2001, 2004, and then I, I made a poor business decision and kind of screwed everything up with my business, hiring somebody and paying them too much, and I just, those
There was a
things happen
learning.
with businesses. And
There's
so,
learnings. Yeah.
I started doing medical transcription, which is probably the worst choice of a job for someone like me, because you just sit and you listen to someone talk and you type word for word what they're
Yeah.
saying for hours on end. And although I found it fascinating when I was learning the medical terminology and stuff. That was interesting. But as soon as I knew all of it, I was like, this is so boring and I cannot stand it. And this is pure hell. So I was looking for other things and I was trying to find, and I had this wonderful synchronistic thing happen where I was for fun doing tarot readings on like AOL chat. This is how long ago that was. I'm just doing card readings, like, whatever, having fun with people. And people are like, you really should be a counselor. And I'm like, well, I've always wanted to be an art therapist. I think that'd be awesome. And they're like, well, you're a single mom. You totally could go find somewhere that has a, whatever. I'm like, I can't go to school. There's nowhere, like, I can't afford to go to school, to all these things. So I started calling and I called a bunch of schools. None of them had what I was looking for. And then I stopped, I gave up. I went out and did something. I came back and there was a voicemail from one of the schools. When I went to call them back, I called a different school back, and I actually called the wrong, like, I called where I went, Marion University up in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and I got straight through to this grant program.
Wow.
And they're like, oh yeah, we'll pay if you qualify and we accept you, we'll pay for your tuition and your housing and this and that and all these other things. And I'm like, what? And you have a program in art therapy in 2006? Like, this is unheard of. And I got into it,
Wow.
and it was the best thing. It was a miracle. And so I was 3 years into that program when I got sick. So everything was
Mm,
like totally on track. And so it really surprised me. And so looking back, I'm like, oh, it was what was meant to happen too, even though it was
right.
a really shitty experience to get sick. It's been part of the process.
Yeah,
And
what's your
you
spiritual, like,
know,
perspective on, like, the illness and the rerouting of your
yeah,
career and business?
it was, I mean, there's a lot of things that have come from it. I've definitely learned. It opened me up to. I was thinking this too. It opened me up to kind of um, a parasitic relationship too. Like, it made me very vulnerable, which invited somebody in that made things even worse.
Mm,
And I feel like it took away a lot of who I was. But I think that's part of what needed to happen in order for me to reach
mhm.
the level that I'm at now.
Say more about that.
Um, well, today the reading that I did, and one of the intentions. So every day that I do on the calendar, it's a reading. I set an intention. I say, what do I need to know for today?
Okay.
And I put a bunch of paint down. It's just a blob, and then I paint what I see in the blob while I'm tuned in, and then I translate that into words. And the words that came about today, some of the words were, bless the decay as you would bless a new day. Like, so
Oh,
it's not just like focusing on the positive. And I think because I was, like I said, old school entrepreneur, I was all like, be positive no matter what, like happy, happy, joy, like, which
yes.
is very bad for the system if you're not actually feeling it. Um, and so I think it broke me out of that. Like, before, like right around that time, I remember I had some friends and they used to call me the Cheshire Cat because I was always smiling. And I just kind of have a habit of smiling or whatever. But that's also a trauma response. And so all of this stuff that I learned about myself through it. So like big picture, getting sick helped me to like accept a lot of my shadow and brokenness and things like that with the good, and like just I feel so much more whole now,
Yeah.
um in who I am. And there was just so much that had to break down and kind of be reborn to be able to channel the energy that I have now and to like upgrade, because it just was I was just kind of held, and it took me a really long time. I mean, it took a decade. So it was a slow burn for this phoenix to rise. It was a very slow. And so I want to say for anybody who's like I know sometimes we hear people's stories and we're like, "Oh, like I got hit by a truck and then I got up and then I like my bones healed and then I like walked across stage and got my diploma." Like they think it happens like that, and it's not always like that. I mean, that does happen, but um and it's
It
happened
sounds
for
like
me in
it
that
was
way before, but
a
this is
decade of, like, a lot of deep transformative things, a lot of different dark nights of the soul, and
yeah,
different challenges to, like, bring you where you are
a
today.
lot of letting go. A lot of letting go. One of my favorite sayings is let go or be dragged. And if you've
Mm.
ever like water skied and not let go of the rope right away when you fall, it was like that. And I think I
Mhm.
wasn't letting go fully enough, and I was just being dragged through this thing for a while. And could it have happened quicker? Maybe, but I think where I'm at now looking back, I just feel like I'm so much more sure about my place, and not that I have a clear vision of what I'm supposed to do, like, "Oh, yeah, now I know my purpose is this and that." I'm so much more comfortable with the unknown
Mhm.
than I was, and I think it needed to kinda, like, break me down in a way to say, like, "You don't have to have this one thing that you are supposed to be forevermore," which
Yeah.
is what I was seeking all this time. And every time I would think that that's what oh, if I could just figure out what I'm supposed to do with my life, everything will fall into place. Well, everything falls into place
Mm.
when you accept that you are what you're supposed to be in life. Like, you are now. This is what I'm supposed to be doing
Mhm.
right now. I'm supposed to be drinking my coffee and chatting with Ashley, and like this is what I'm this because if it wasn't, I wouldn't be.
Yeah.
And
I love
that's,
that
you know,
a lot because I do feel like I was a recruiter before I did what I've done now for the last decade, and that was, one of the things that kind of got me into coaching is I felt like there was such an identity that people had around, like,
mhm.
business and what they did, and even, like, I feel like this, like, whole sense of, like, people finding, like, purpose. I would always see it that it's kind of like this river, and it's like your purpose is really to, like, be you, and there's all these different versions and iterations of it, and it's gonna change, and you're gonna
Yeah.
change, and that's okay. And I also feel that we really find our freedom in the darkness, and I think that
Mhm.
ultimately that what we're looking for is a certain way that we wanna feel on the inside that actually isn't like purpose or fulfillment or the specific kind of job that we really wanna feel free, I think, within ourselves.
Mhm.
And I think that when things get really crazy, I don't know about you, but I felt like at my, like, darkest hour, at one point, I was like, "You know what? Like, I just like, fuck, like, trying to, like, know the answers of, like, what's gonna happen or when things are gonna change because I'm really tired of, like, just waiting for this next thing to come in or this next, like,
Heavy,
knowing to
yeah.
happen." Like, I just wanna feel like I wanna just enjoy my life wherever I'm at as much as
Mhm.
possible, and I think that you
Yeah.
have some of that as well. Is that what you feel?
It's yeah, absolutely. Because that I still find myself doing that, but I recognize it quicker now, but it's definitely this thing of like, "Oh, I'll feel good when." I'll
Yeah.
feel good when. And so we think that experience or that thing is gonna bring us to that place that we can access now.
Yeah.
And and so yeah, that's I've learned that very much. And that's what I think of too when I say like my tolerance level is narrowed, where I just don't give my energy to things that don't feel good because I don't have the bandwidth to deal with those things, because I know now that I want to be in this place vibrationally. I want to feel this. And so I just, no, thank you. And yeah, it's just a limited, it's not about it is, I mean, there are things that I want, there's things
Of
and places I
course.
want to go and people I want
Yeah.
to be around and that, of course. Um, but I'm able to see why what I want that. Oh, I want that because I love feeling connected with my family, or I love feeling this or that. And I could feel that in the thought form also. I can think about my parents right now and feel them and love them and that kind of thing. Is it nice to be next to them? Absolutely. But I can also, and in that way too, I think our life purpose, we are the path. Like, you can't get off your path.
Mm,
You are your
mm.
purpose. You are your path. You're on it. You can't ever get off of it. And those are things that have come through because I connect with my spirit through art every day.
Yeah.
Those things are so apparent to me. Then I just felt like, I think when we're not having some sort of practice, whether it's art or whatever it is, if
Yeah.
we're not connecting to our non-physical counterparts, and if we're not feeling ourselves fully,
Mm.
the light, the dark, the physical, the non-physical, we were missing some pieces to the puzzle, and so then we feel like we're seeking. So it's really not about finding the right answers to things. It's just about like being comfortable in the questions, I think, and just being present, I guess, is probably the simpler way to say it.
I've been realizing that the big, like, collective that I think I create for are people like you and I that have, like, a really creative spirit, but that it's almost like our connection to, like, spirituality and our soul self really comes through the creation
Yeah.
energy. And I think that what I've been noticing is that we're almost taught, like, the doing of spirituality of, like, oh, like, you need to meditate, or maybe you should be, doing these specific things, listen to affirmations. But I guess I just really want to hear your perspective on, like how for some people, like, their creativity or their art is their spirituality. What do you feel about that?
I mean, I think there's too much of an emphasis on the separation of it. I don't I think we make things so much harder than it needs to be. I got trained in healing touch, and so it's very methodical. Like, there's methods. Like, you do this and you move your hand 4 times this way and you do, and I was like, but this is just who we are. Like, this is just, and this is the same thing as when I was a kid. Like, this doesn't make sense to, like, and so, like, art and creativity, it's so it's not even just human, it's just life force. It's just, this is what this is what physical beingness does. It just
Yeah.
is, like, that's what flowers do. It's what it's steam coming off a cup of coffee. It's just expression, you know. Life is expression, and art is just a form of the expression of life. And we just do it so effortlessly when we're not worried about other people's opinions. And I think that's just a hindrance that comes in.
Mm,
It's, if there's any hindrance, it's usually because we've been told that there's a right or wrong, or there's something like that. And that happens with spirituality too, how we connect to our spiritual self, and what we believe, and those things too, or whether we believe or whether we don't believe, and how we want to define our worldview is so heavily influenced. Like, and that stuff happens without our, mm, to a degree, without our consent early, like before we're 7, all of that.
mhm.
It's programming, and it's not like anybody's trying to harm us really in general. But it's just, those are subconscious things, and those are things that we then can unpack, though, later on. And I think that's just a lot of the work. So we just, as we notice it, and I think we just make a big stinking deal about things that don't need to be a big stinking deal. That's my biggest thing is, I'm very intellectual. I love to dive into really esoteric, like, heavy topics. I love it. I could have these really deep conversations. I love chemistry and neuroscience, and I like to know how things work and stuff like that. So I can lean into an intellect any day, anytime. But I think that an analytical mind gets in the way of us just being free flowing and being like, "Oh, that doesn't make sense. I don't need that anymore." You know what I mean? And instead we're like, "Well, I have that belief I have. We have to get rid of this belief, and then I have to do cord cutting, and I have to do this, and I have to stand on my head and align my chakras to the moon on the phase." Like all that stuff I think is
Yeah. Well, I love
just
that
like,
art gets
you
the
know,
body involved because I do think that there's so much healing
yeah,
that's beyond the mind, and like
yeah.
dance was like a really big thing for me, and like
Oh, for
moving
sure.
and just feeling what I was going to feel, like especially like what you were saying. Like I noticed so many people they don't want to feel the anger. They're like, "Oh, it's bad or it's
Mm,
not spiritual right now to feel angry or to feel sad." So I'm
yeah.
just going to meditate it away or just and I think that there's these emotional cycles that need to complete. Otherwise, it does get stored in our body and it gets
I
very
mean, there's a
stuck
reason
there.
for it, right? Like, we have to express that stuff. Like, anger serves such a wonderful purpose for like to move. It moves the
Mhm.
energy out of despair and sadness, and it
Mm.
it brings us to a different frequency. Sometimes there can be a backlash if we express it in ways that are destructive, which it can be a destructive energy. But if
Yeah.
we learn to express it through ways like art, for example,
Yes.
or movement, or I used to do drumming with people, which is such a great, bang on something really hard and get it
Yeah.
out, and
Get it
you know
out. And don't get stuck there
yeah,
necessarily, but like
yeah,
feel it, be in it. It's valid.
exactly, absolutely, yeah, I totally agree with that. And it is spiritual because it can't not be, because we're spiritual being. I mean, we're, we are spirit, so it's spiritual, therefore. Mhm.
Yeah. Do you when you think about like the shadow elements or the things that you really didn't want to be seen as, like, because it said you told me that what you went through really brought a lot of stuff to the surface. Like, what are some big
Mhm.
shadow pieces that you felt you really integrated over the last decade?
Oh gosh, the idea of being irresponsible was one of them. That came up a lot, and and especially I think this is something maybe artists experience when we're looking at careers, especially, is like, oh, I'm not being a responsible adult by investing my time and energy in trying to build an art career, because
Mm.
I should be doing a real job, because that's the responsible thing to do. I should
Or
go
for
wherever the
parents as
money is gonna
well,
be.
right?
Yeah,
That's
like,
a big one.
especially as a parent, when you bring
Yeah.
in parenting and it's like, I'm providing this, and I was very lucky. To be really honest, I've had a lot of help from family, and I've never not in any way have I had to do everything alone,
Yeah.
and I think
Well,
if
good for
anybody's
you for
honest, like,
receiving
I just
that, you
you
know?
know, it has not been easy. That's the other thing too, is receiving help has been a
Oh,
big,
yeah.
you know, um, but so that responsibility and being told I was being irresponsible, and what I
Mhm.
realized was like, oh, there's this idea of being responsible, but isn't it also irresponsible not to use the gifts that we're given? Is it irresponsible to ignore the truth that's coming out of my body? Because every time I would try, every my you talk about the body being wise, like every time I would go in the direction of what I thought I should do,
Yeah.
my body would start to break down. I would get sicker. I had migraines every day for 10 years until I started listening and aligning with what was true for me and making my art
Wow.
and doing the things that felt in alignment with me. And
Yeah.
I mean, it sucked. And it would get worse when I would get close to things that were not. I had panic attacks walking into job interviews that should have been
Mm.
I was
So do
well
you feel like
suited
your
for,
body
but
was, like, really like, "No, no, no, like, we're not doing this," and it was really just
it was
like
a barometer. It was yeah, it was I wasn't listening to anything else, and the
mm,
only thing that I was listening to, because I was, like, forced physically back to home. I was forced physically back to, like, rest. Um, it was bad.
for anyone that is watching this that is, like, knee deep in going through something really tough, maybe
Mhm.
an instant onset of an illness, or maybe they've been in that that stage for a long time, like, what would you wanna say to them? Like, or maybe what would you wanna say to yourself
I
in
think
some
what
of
I
those hard
would
moments?
wish I had learned earlier, I mean, it's fine how long it took and everything. Excuse me. Um is just choose you. Like I think that's what and it was a learning experience to trusting myself because I went on like a medication roller coaster because I was trusting um I, and I knew because I've done muscle testing and stuff, I could feel when a medication came close to me that it was not right for my body.
Right.
But I took it anyway because I didn't trust my own authority. I listened to people that like invaded. I had a guy that invaded into my life, like this narcissistic kind of thing, and um, I listened to him. I gave him my authority. Like, so I gave away a lot of my authority because I didn't. I was like, oh, I'm weak, and I think that
Mhm.
it was until I finally like there did come a moment where I was like, oh my God, and I came face to face. Like it was either choose me or I wouldn't be here anymore. So I was like, I have to choose me. So I like if I was going to put it into one message is now's the time to choose you. Like it is time to put yourself first because and I had this plaque over it's over it came out of some book or something when I was in school, some art therapy book and it was like a bookmark or something. It fell out. Like I have messages come to me in these really weird ways. Um and it said taking good care of yourself is the best way to take care of everything. And I
Hmm.
looked at that and I read that out loud for many years before I finally did it. And I didn't realize what taking good care of myself actually
Yeah,
was.
let's talk about that, like, specifically what that means
Mhm.
for
It
you.
yeah, for me now, it means prioritizing my time. So I start my day every day with art and my and connection to myself and my community because that's a part of my spirituality now is the
Yeah.
people that I connect with and making my art and doing that. And then I exercise my body, I move my body every day, and I go swimming because I need water. Like I need to balance myself with water. I'm very fiery. I'm an
Mhm.
Aries and I'm just like and my mind is just constant and being in water just gets me like balanced. so I so I take the first, probably 5 hours of every day doing these things that keep me healthy.
Mm.
And when I started doing that, and then when I get out of because I do it consistently, but consistency is 51%, like,
Yeah.
so
Be
when I get
gentle
out
on
of
yourself, right?
yeah, when I get out of sync with it and I go back to it, there's always still this little bit of guilt. So
Mm.
there's like guilt of taking care of myself, like I'm
Oh,
being selfish,
yeah. I mean, I remember I would have, like, this voice that when I would feel tired or I needed to take a break, there was this voice is like, "You can't stop, you're gonna get behind." Like, "What about this? What about" like, there's, like, a really
Yeah.
real part of us that tries to, like, stop it. Do you have
I
that?
had oh my God, when so I live in a place where it snows heavily in the winter. And when like the first year that I was sick, I was still like gung ho, like going to school. I've done a lot of like I'll have to share some poetry and stuff I wrote around that time. It's really intense. But like I remember one day I was outside shoveling. It was deep snow. It was like up to my knees. And I was so sick. Like, imagine the worst flu you've ever had. Head to toe, aches and pains. You're just flushed.
Mhm.
And every step is just, and I'm trying to shovel. Right. And rather than like, I had neighbors who had snow blowers. I could have asked for help. There were alternatives. Right. Um, or like nowadays, I hire somebody to do, like if I really need to, I will get somebody else to do it. But no, I was like, no, I have to do this myself because otherwise I'm being irresponsible and da 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 da. And I'm like out
Mm.
there and I'm like, I get through it all and I get up the steps and I open the door to go into my house and I just collapse because I'm just out of juice completely. And I am in between my doorway on the threshold, half inside my house, half outside my house. And I'm yelling at myself in my head, going, what is wrong with you? You can get up. Why are you just lying here? And there was like two voices in my head. Like one just
Mhm.
completely couldn't speak at all and was just, and there was a part of me that's like, why am I can get up, can't I? Why can't I get up? And there was like, it was such a weird experience. but I was so cruel to myself in that.
Mm,
And I'm like, and I look back at that and I'm like, good God, like I just got done shoveling all that. Like, and there was such, all that stuff was just, it was playing out though.
mm.
And so now it's like, I wouldn't, that wouldn't happen now because I wouldn't push myself to do something that would put me in that position to where I'm at zero anymore.
Yeah.
You know, no matter
You
what the
you know your
expectations are.
capacity, you listen to your capacity, I'm
Yeah.
hearing, and that it sounds like you, like, have had just a real understanding that your best is gonna look different on different days and what you have to
Yeah.
give, and you honor that.
Yeah. And I guess there was a lot of fear about the consequences from other people for a long time. And I think that it took me the decade of experiencing those consequences with other people,
Mm,
um, that I did, that I made it like, you know, it wasn't the end of the world. The worst case scenarios have happened. I
yeah,
had that I had my ex-boyfriend. I When I finally told him no, I wasn't going to help him. I wasn't going to sacrifice my well-being for his, you know, so that he might just make myself uncomfortable so he could be comfortable. Um, that was the last time I spoke to him because he was not in his physical body the next day. So that was the worst case scenario. I had a fear that if I denied him help, he was going to die, and that's what happened. And I survived it, you know. And I was, and
yeah.
it took me. I mean, it was like 5, 6 years ago, so I had to process that.
Oh, yeah.
But those types of things kept happening where I was like, okay, I can tell people no. I can put myself first and and it's gonna be okay. I'm still gonna be okay. Even if the worst case scenario happens, I'm still gonna be okay. And
You're
actually,
gonna
as a
be
matter of
okay.
fact, I'm gonna be better off, you
Yeah,
know, and so will
yeah.
they, you know.
Mhm, mhm.
So it's
Oh, thank you so much
rough.
for
Yeah.
sharing your story and so
Oh,
much
my
of
pleasure.
yourself, like, so openly and vulnerably, and I agree that, I know I've been very, critical of myself and, like, for me, for instance, like, after my divorce, like, feeling like I needed to take that time for myself, that there's another part of me that was critical of me as a mom, being like, "Well, you should be out there," and I'm like, "Well, maybe this is the best I can do. Maybe it's better for all of us if I come and take this moment in my room right now to
You
just go
think?
step
Yeah.
out." Yeah, so thank you for, being a part
Mhm.
of this series because I think
I'm
that
excited for what you're doing.
oh,
This is
we're so
wonderful.
we're
What
so
a gift.
critical, and I feel like I just
Yeah.
want people to bring so much more love and compassion to themselves wherever they're at, and
Yeah.
I would love for you to share where people can, like, find you, Linda, and, like, find, your work or maybe, like, work with you or be a part of
Yeah.
your community.
Yeah, they can, so I have a website, it's lindafabry.com, and then I'm on, most of the socials. I don't spend a lot of time on Instagram. I'm mostly on Facebook and sometimes on TikTok, and I'm kind of moving a lot of stuff over to YouTube. But yeah, my name, it's just everything's by my name. It's Linda Fabry, Fabry, or Linda Paints on TikTok. But yeah,
I love it.
so
And do you
just
find that you
available.
attract a lot of people that maybe have some crossover in their stories as well, like that energetically that
Yeah.
ins yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's, you know, because I am a firm believer that our external experience is just a reflection of the internal. And so I definitely find, especially when I'm doing readings or I'm interacting with people, that things that are coming out of my mouth are things I need to hear too. So like
Yeah.
people come to me for readings or they come to me just to interact when I'm doing lives and stuff. And it's like, oh, I needed to talk to this person today for my own benefit too. But then I'm sharing something with them. So it is always an exchange. It's a
Mm.
huge blessing. You know, I love the people that have come, you know, come in and out, and some I've known for many, many years, and then I always get to meet new friends. So you know, technology has been a huge blessing. Yeah.
Mm. Thank you, Linda. I
Yeah. Well,
appreciate you
thank
so much,
you.
and I hope that everyone will follow Linda and her work, or maybe even get, like, a reading, like, what was the name of the reading that you did that you told
So
me?
I do paint gazing sessions, and then
Thank you.
I'll show you my soul portraits. So these are a couple. When I first started healing myself, I did self portraits, and so
Wow. Oh my
there's just
gosh,
there's
Linda.
when you
Oh
look
my
into your own
gosh.
eyes. It's
These
very
are
healing. It's
gorgeous.
hard to look at ourselves, but having a work of art that you can look at, it really helps. And so I do these and I make oracle cards and I do paint gazing session where I'm channeling a person's energy into, so this is their energy channeled into a painting too. And then
Wow.
I interpret it into words for them too. So they have something really tangible.
What a gift.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Linda.
It's thank you.
Bye for now, everyone.
All right.